arrangements being made with Tanzania to have convicted rapist and murderer Thabo Bester and his partner Dr. Nandipha Magudumana return to South Africa. This after they were arrested by Tanzanian authorities on Friday evening. Bester and Magudumana have been on the run since his escape from the Mangaung prison in May last year. To unpack all of this further, I'm joined by Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union spokesperson Richard Mamabolo, who joins us virtually from here in Johannesburg. Richard, thanks for your time this afternoon, as always. I'm sure you welcome the rearrest of Thabo Bester here for many reasons, but one of them being that it allows the focus to go back on just what circumstances allowed Thabo Bester to escape from the Mangaung Correctional Services facilities in the first place.
Indeed, definitely, we are quite happy about the rearrest. I think it has obviously created a negative impact on the public perception around our correctional facilities, but as well as the diminishing confidence within the criminal justice cluster in its entirety. So this is a welcome decision. Of course, we know that it will also bring relief to those who had been victims of Mr. Thabo Bester and the general public. But what is quite worrying is the fact that, just even during the past week, you had the G4S still denying that Thabo Bester had escaped. In fact, they were reiterating that Mr. Bester had died, while you had at the same time had the Department of Correctional Services actually arguing that he did escape. So this arrest would obviously then have to lead to further investigations, which would obviously reveal as to what happened to during the escape and where did the other body come from, and numerous other questions, of course, that have been in the public eye in the past week. So it's something that we welcome. But of course, I think looking at the track record of the G4S, there have been numerous other violations of human rights. And of course, even since the Bester escape, there has been another escape at the very same center. So we feel that in most cases, they opt to cover up some of the challenges they're facing, as opposed to actually ensuring that they work closely with the Department of Correctional Services to resolve these matters. As a union, we feel that both the Department of Correctional Services and G4S need to take accountability, because immediately when you enter into a public-private partnership, there are certain clauses which need to be abided by. And in this instance, there's what you call a Correctional Services Act, which informs how the agreement between the government and the private company should operate. In that regard, there was supposed to be some form of oversight by the Department of Correctional Services on a regular basis. Had it not been for this recent media reports, perhaps we could not even have known that Thabo Bester had escaped. So both parties need to take accountability and ensure that we actually work on ensuring that we regain public trust in this regard.
Yeah, that public trust is a very important question as a result of the story, because Correctional Services hasn't wanted to admit that this story has come to this point because it was made public. They say that it was a complete coincidence, for instance, that autopsy report that was waited for so long came out a year later, round about the same week that the story really hit the headlines. They say, no, it was just a matter of process, and that's why it took so long. But Richard, I want to ask you about the role of private security in law enforcement at our prisons. Do you think that the scale of this Thabo Bester story will finally allow for a conversation to take place about whether so much of law enforcement in our correctional facilities should be farmed out to private security companies?
Look, in fact, it was an oversight in the first place to have these two prisons. The role of correctional services being outsourced to private prisons. In the first instance, the core mandate of our Department of Correctional Services is to rehabilitate. Now, this private prisons' core aim is to obviously generate profit, and of course, through that, they then would not necessarily follow the standards and norms that the department would have obviously ascribed to them. That is what the first thing. But as well, when you compare the monies that are being spent on these private prisons, is way higher than what we spent on our correctional centers across the country. Over R1 billion is spent on these two private prisons, which house around just below 6,000 inmates. and per inmate on a daily basis, they spend over 400 rands. We feel that the department should take over these two private prisons and ensure that the resources that they are wasting currently there can then be utilized to ensure that we then reconstruct and improve conditions within our existing correctional centers. As things stand, these guys are just allowed unto themselves. And of course, you had seen during the week that they were failing to cooperate with the Department of Correctional Services. So it's something that definitely needs to be dealt with. We know that they've got a 25-year contract, which ends in 2026 and 2027 respectively. But we feel that we can no longer wait for 3 more years until the contract comes to its expiry date. Government should definitely take over, and we can then reprioritize the funds to actually ensure that we improve conditions on our existing correctional facilities.
Now, Richard, I was just speaking to my colleague Avibo Mtile in Cape Town, and he was telling us of a certain development inside this Thabo Bester story, and that's with regards to how Home Affairs, how the paperwork around the death of that so-called prisoner a year ago was managed, and how that paperwork was able to cover up the fact that Thabo Bester had indeed escaped. And now questions being asked about how that paperwork was pushed through. In your experience with regards to correctional facility, how high would Thabo Bester's connections would have to go, both within correctional services and other parts of government departments like Home Affairs, to have been able to pull off an escape of that matter? And is this kind of corruption more widespread than we'd like to think?
Look, considering what has been revealed already, it is quite clear that it's humanly impossible that a person can escape from that facility. This is one of the highest secured facilities in the country. And you would then have to get assistance from different sources to actually pull through that escape. So it's quite clear that there were a lot of people involved. And of course, it then therefore means that there was a lot of money involved as well. So we think the fact that Thabo Bester is rearrested, perhaps they could then further investigate, and perhaps we could get to the bottom of this by getting further details around who actually was working with him and what actually transpired. But most definitely, heads must roll. There are senior people who are involved, and of course, we want to ensure that at the end of this, the only way we're going to regain credibility is through ensuring that all those who are involved, despite Mr. Bester, are dealt with, and of course, the law takes its course.
A private investigator that's been keeping tabs on the story very closely mentioned yesterday that he does hope that security around Thabo Bester will be extremely tight when he does eventually come back into the country, because it's clear that he will have a lot of information in his possession that protects people in various very important positions. What's your reaction to that?
Look, we think that there should definitely be security around him. Of course, I think him coming back, being rearrested, also poses a death threat for him, because you would probably have people who would want to kill him so that he does not reveal whatever information that he might have or whatever information that the law enforcement officer would be seeking. So I think it's quite a good thing that they should definitely have a high level of security around him to ensure that nothing really happens to him. Otherwise, we do not want to have an instance wherein before he can reveal what the details around his escape, then he finds himself losing his life.
Yeah, indeed. Very serious stuff there. Thank you so much. Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union spokesperson Richard Mamabolo joining us virtually from here in Joburg. We thank him for his time.